Q&A, apparently I'm not talking loudly enough, so my voice is probably going to sound a little bit forced.
Okay.
But everybody who's watching is supposed to be able to hear my questions.
So just don't shout.
Yeah. All right, we'll pray, then we'll let you get right into it. And as soon as you're done, Mr. Stevens and I will start with the questions, and we'll kind of split up Mr. Drake's questions. So Mr. Stevens will ask one of his own, and then he'll ask one of Drake's questions, and we'll point out to you which ones are Drake's.
Okay.
Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for all of the good gifts and the good things that you have put into Sinai. I thank you for the way that she's worked on this question that she cares about deeply this year, the good research that she's been able to do, the good preparation that she's been able to do. I ask that your hand of blessing would be upon her, giving her peace and comfort during her presentation and Q&A, clarity of mind that she can draw on all of the things that she has researched and read over the course of this year, the ability to defend well and confidently. I ask all of this in the name of Christ our Savior.
Amen.
You may begin.
What would you do if two mothers were arguing over one child? This very thing happens in 1 Kings. Two women both have children. One of the children dies and one lives. They both claim to be the mother of the living child. They go to King Solomon and ask him to settle their dispute. Seeing that neither of them are going to budge and give the child to the rightful mother, King Solomon asks who the rightful mother is. One of the women steps up and says, King Solomon offered to have the child cut in half and a half given to each mother. One of the women immediately refuses and says that the child should be given to the other woman. This indicates to King Solomon that the woman who offered the child up to the other woman was the rightful mother, and so she was given the child. This scenario happens a lot in the foster care system, where the rightful mother of a child isn't fit to take care of the child, and a foster mother may be better suited to take care of a child, and that decision is left up to foster care workers. There are over 400,000 children in the foster care system, and as of 2017, 32,000 of those live in Texas. $15 to $20 billion are spent a year on the foster care system, and many foster parents wonder how billions of dollars can be spent on a system and still see half of the children end up with chronic mental problems, 80% with emotional problems, and a quarter end up in homelessness once they age out of the system. It is for these reasons that I am arguing that the foster system fails to address the pre-system trauma of vulnerable children and introduces new forms of trauma which have a long-lasting effect on the mental and emotional development of these children. First, it is important that we understand what trauma is. The APA Dictionary of Psychology defines trauma as any disturbing experience that results in significant fear, helplessness, confusion, or any other disturbing feeling that has a long-lasting negative effect on the person. Trauma affects all kinds of people, both at the time of the trauma and after the fact of the trauma, and this is especially true for children. Bessel van der Kolk, in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, writes about how trauma affects both adults and children. Trauma affects every part of a person, whether that's emotionally, physically, or mentally, and it stays with them long after the fact. For children in foster care system, trauma is crucial in their lives because a lot of them don't have many ways to deal with that trauma. So we must understand what the foster care system is and how it works for these children. The system begins when a report goes out. A report can be given by a teacher, a doctor, or a neighbor, or anyone else in a child's life who sees some kind of abuse or neglect. Next is screening. Screening is the process of deciding whether a case is screened in or screened out, and the discretion is left up to the screener. For example, a case about a child being left home alone will be screened out and not dealt with unless another case comes up about that same child. And a case about a child coming to school with obvious forms of bruises, marks, or hits will be screened in. Then that case goes to an investigator. Once an investigator is assigned, he has to determine whether the case is critical and the child needs to be removed from the home immediately. If the situation is critical, a family resource worker is assigned. This worker begins trying to find a place for the child to be placed. If a family resource worker is not available, a social services hotline is called. The social service hotline has a list of families willing to take the child on immediate notice, and most of these homes are very temporary, and once the child finds a more permanent home, they will be placed there. After the family resource worker, an assessment worker is assigned. This worker has 45 days to put together a picture of the family. They go into the home, meet the family if that is an option, and try to get an idea of what the situation at home is for this child. And in most cases, these children are already in the records because today's abusive parents were yesterday's abused children, and there's usually a cycle of abuse and neglect in that household. After the 45 days, an ongoing social worker is assigned. This worker stays with the family and sets up visitation between the parents and the child. He will stay with that child until he is placed with a different child or a different worker is assigned. And he stays with that child until the child is placed in a permanent home or a foster home. The system is good in many ways because many people are involved. The child is being given from person to person, and there are many different opinions on where this child should be placed, many different voices speaking into this child's life. But this can also be bad because the child isn't able to form close relationships with these people or really be cared for and nurtured. Next, I will address what the trauma is that these children experience that is a cause for them being removed from their families. Almost 700,000 children were reported having undergone maltreatment as of 2017. 74% of that was neglect, 18% physical abuse, and 8% sexual abuse. And in many cases, these children experience multiple kinds of abuse, and so those statistics may overlap for some children. Each state has its own definitions of child maltreatment, but most recognize neglect, physical abuse, and sexual abuse. First is neglect. The percentage for neglect is so large because so many things fit into this category. The National Conference of State Legislatures defines neglect as any of the following: physical neglect, which is not caring for a child's nutritional or other physical needs; medical neglect, which is not getting them the medical help they need; inadequate nurturing or affection; and many other forms of simply not caring for a child in the way that they need to grow. In order to avoid trauma like neglect, children need to be able to form a proper attachment. Proper attachment is when a child has an adult or a guardian in their life early on who they can form an attachment to, and this adult would be somebody that loves them, cares for them, and nurtures them, and provides for them in the way that they need. When proper attachment doesn't happen, in most cases these children are diagnosed with ADHD, which is attention hyperactivity disorder, and ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder. These disorders are often diagnosed when children have control issues, which is very common for foster children because they're being moved from home to home and have little to no say over what is happening. These children have a hard time processing powerful emotions, and so they act out. And this happens through outbursts where they will act out physically or emotionally, trying to hurt the people around them because they want control. And this makes sense for these children because in most cases they were abused or neglected at a young age, and so they act out in the same way that their parents did. And a lot of times ADHD can lead to ODD, so the child will have not one but two of these disorders. Medication is usually prescribed to these children instead of addressing the causes of these disorders. Second is physical abuse. Physical abuse is frequent pushing, grabbing, slapping, or any other physical contact hard enough to leave marks. Vander Koch writes about physical abuse on animals and children. He writes, "Scared animals return home, whether home is safe or frightening." This is very true for children. They only have ever known the abuse that they have gone through, and so it is the normal for them. And they have nowhere else to go, and they are too young to make those decisions for themselves. So they continue returning back to the home that is hurting them. The third kind of child maltreatment is sexual abuse. Kathy Harrison, in her book, Another Place at the Table, writes about her experiences as a foster mother and her experiences with these foster children who have experienced abuse. She writes about Sarah, a young girl who had to go through sexual abuse before she was put into the foster care system. Sarah's mother never married and had men coming in and out of the house her whole life. They would come in and they would sexually or physically abuse her, and then they would leave. When Kathy Harrison introduces her the idea of Sarah meeting her husband, Sarah asks, "Is he staying?" This is very normal for foster children who have experienced some kind of abuse. It is all they know, and they are used to men and father figures coming in and out of their lives, never really knowing if they're going to return. Children need to be given tools to address the physical, sexual, and abuse and neglect that they have gone through. They need to be able to understand why they've experienced what they have experienced and that it is wrong. Next, I will address what the constant change that children experience in the foster care system is and how it affects their ability to heal from the trauma that put them in the foster care system. The longer a child is in placement, the more likely they are to move from home to home, never seeing a permanent home. Most children age out of the foster care system before they are ever able to find a home that loves and cares for them well. There are 3 things that cause this. The first is the problem of the difference between foster care and adoptive care. When a mother expresses interest in keeping her child but is unable to at the time, social services will be given to her and the child will be placed in foster care temporarily, and that is where foster care comes in. But if the mother expresses interest and seems like she could recover from the things she is dealing with, then social services will be given to her and the child will stay with her until it is deemed that she can take care of the child without the social services. But the line is fuzzy in between these 2 things, whether a mother is fit or unfit to take care of her child. So in most cases, the child is not put in adoptive care right away and is put in foster care, and the mother will be given social services. And so this child does not know if they will return to their mother, and in most cases it is not clear whether the mother will be able to care for her child. The second problem is inexperienced caseworkers. These workers usually have to go to school to get a 4-year degree in either psychology, sociology, or social studies. After the 4-year degree, they can go directly into social work. These workers are usually young and inexperienced right out of college, and they're working for their paycheck. It is hard work, and I believe that there needs to be more hands-on experience and professionals guiding them through the process before they're able to go out and make these decisions of when your children should be removed from their home or not. The same problem goes for foster parents. I believe that there is too much inexperience within foster parents and that there needs to be more training. Also, these parents are given the bare minimum in terms of money to help care for these children. They don't have enough to take care of things that may not be deemed necessary, but can be so helpful to helping children heal from trauma and experience things that the average kid would. People in these children's lives, like foster parents and foster care workers, need to be better experienced to care for these children. And I believe there needs to be a more hands-on experience before they can go into the field and actually work and care for these children. There are many consequences when people fail to help these children understand and process their trauma. The first and most common effect of this is PTSD. PTSD is hard enough for adults to experience, but for children who have little control over what's happening to them in their lives, they have to battle emotions that they have no way of understanding. And these children will react in 2 different ways, that is acting out and disassociating. The children who act out experience anger, frustration, and confusion. These children usually act out in physical ways, whether that be hurting the people who they think are threatening them, or trying to hurt people emotionally by screaming or hitting or yelling. The children who disassociate experience confusion, fear, and other emotions like that. And these children will shut down from the world around them. They will try to shut out anything around them. And so you usually find these children curled up in a ball or with their eyes glazed over, not reacting to anything around them. These children have to learn to recognize dangerous or harmful situations at a very early age, and they don't have many people helping them deal with that. James 2 writes, "Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, 'Go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it?" From a Christian perspective, I believe that there are many things that the church can do to help these children, whether that be educating the body about the foster care system and ways that they can help, or teaming up with foster agencies in their area. These children never get to experience the joys of early childhood because they are constantly fighting risk, whether that be physical or mental. There are also many long-term effects for these children. They are 2.5 more times likely to consider suicide and 4 more times likely to attempt it once they age out of the foster care system or while in the foster care system. And 30% of the abused foster children or neglected go on to abuse or neglect their own children. The argument can be made that state legislatures recognize the problems within the system and are taking steps to fix them. There are 4 main ways in which state legislatures have recognized that there is a problem that needs to be fixed. First, they are bringing social workers and foster parents together. They are putting together more open forms of communication between these two people and making sure that the child has access to both of these people. Second, there is more emphasis on children's mental health, whether that be addressing things like ADHD and ODD, or giving them the help mentally, whether that be medications or therapy. Third, there is comprehensive screening, which means that there is a quicker removal of children in times of emergency. And the screening process is made more thorough for these children to be better taken care of. Fourth, the state legislators are encouraging the use of Medicaid. These are the health benefits that are provided for these children, and state legislatures are pushing that foster parents and social workers use these to help these children. These are the arguments that can be made that the foster care system is doing what they need to be doing. But I believe that this is not enough. I believe that the workers and the parents need to be given more training, whether that be before they are able to foster or before they are able to go and make the decision of whether a child should be removed. They should be working with people who already do this and have much more experience. I also believe that there needs to be more training while in school for these social workers so that they understand what they're doing and that it is not just about a paycheck, but there are children's lives and families that they're making decisions for. The foster care system fails to address the pre-system trauma of vulnerable children and introduces new forms of trauma, which have a long-lasting effect on their mental and emotional development. Like Solomon, foster care workers need to be trained in how to make clear and wise decisions when choosing how and when to remove a child from their biological parent.